Hey guys, Scott and Ivo here, back with another episode from the Gate Geeks. Today we're going to talk about that wonderful question. Do I need a custom orthotic, or will a prefabricated orthotic that's over the counter work just fine? So stay tuned. Hey guys, Scott and Ivo back again. Like I just stated, today we're talking all about orthotics, whether they be custom, whether they be prefabricated, which to use when. Ivo, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. We're coming to you guys live today from Folsom Prison. You can tell by our nice brick background here. We are in talking to the homies about their feet and about orthotics. I'm doing good, man. We could use a little
Excellent.
snow in Colorado, though.
You keep it in Colorado. I'll keep my sun, my sand, and my beach. So
There
anyway,
you go. There you go.
anyway, you and I both use both custom and prefabricated orthotics, right? It's not a one size fits all approach. There's a time and a place for either type of device. But the key for us is there is a time and a place for each of those devices, right? And when to use custom, when to use prefabricated, what's the right prefabricated, what are the components of the prefab that make it, appropriate, and then when to really make that decision to jump to the custom. So let's dive into it. Ivo, what are your, let's not bury the lead. What are your real implications here for using a custom orthotic?
The real implications will be, one, the amount of correction needed exceeds the amount that a OTC can do. So, or if the patient has a very strange, like we'll see people with club feet or something like that, and they have a really strange foot or a strange foot morphology, which is just not going to lend itself to an OTC. Generally, and I think you do the same thing, we will modify a shoe or a sock liner first if that's a potential. And if it's not, and that's not going to be enough support, we're going to use an OTC as a trial basis in the office to see how that does for the individual. And if that's working well, which I would have to say it works probably well 70% of the time, we don't have to go any further. Or if they use that for a while and feel like, gee, I'm better, but I'm only like 85%, and the over the counter has gotten to the point where I can't modify it any further in the office. We use Cadence product, Cadence insoles. They have a physician only, line or therapist only line that we like, which is a little beefier. They're pretty decent. They're heat moldable. They're grindable. You can post them. And this isn't a diss, the only thing I don't like about them is that the top cover is 5 mils or thicker. And if you need something thinner, you have to grind the top cover down. And the 5 mils goes over the plastic portion, the working portion of the orthotic as well. Whereas when we're doing stuff in the office or we're building customs, we do basically 2 to 3 mils over the shell and then 5 mils in the forefoot. So we run into volume issues. It's no problem with the product. It's just that it doesn't always work, especially if you have to put a lift in a shoe or something like that. We really can't get much more than about 5 mils worth of material in somebody's shoe before they start walking out of the back of it.
Yeah.
But I would say failure of an OTC, or the OTC not being able to be aggressive enough to address the patient's problem. How about you?
So my world's a little bit different. I work with some elite, high-level athletes where, unfortunately, cost doesn't usually come into play all that much, and their demands of having something specifically designed for them, their requirements, their needs, their wants, is high. So we do probably custom orthotics more. I'm not gonna say more than we should, but probably in some cases you could get away with an over-the-counter one. But because we're dealing with, the athletes at the level that I am, having something specifically designed for them is optimal, we'll say. That's not to say, again, that this problem or their problems couldn't potentially be dealt with an over-the-counter one, which oftentimes they may try, in the quick meantime. But if anything, substantial needs to be done, we're going the custom. I think it provides, oftentimes when I'm dealing with shoe brands, shoe manufacturers that are mandated by our contractual agreements. And we all know that the lasts of certain shoes don't necessarily line up with the lasts of the particular individual's foot. a custom orthotic helps facilitate a better fit in the shoe. Oftentimes I find makes the shoe and that makes the foot actually feel a little bit more at home, let's say, in the shoe. And thus another reason to do a custom type of insert. Again, in some of those cases where you're just trying to create a custom footbed to make the foot fit better in the shoe, you don't have to maybe go crazy with all these different accommodations and different manipulations to the device. You might be able to just get away with a little bit of good contour, a good solid base, nice width, good cushion, and you're good. But it's designed specifically for that particular person. And that's really what we need to talk about is what makes a custom orthotic versus an over-the-counter one, right? A custom one is where you supposedly take a mold of that particular individual's foot and create the device around that particular shape, that mold of that foot. So by creating a custom footbed, I know we say footbeds aren't necessarily an orthotic, but if you take a basic footbed that's molded to that individual and have maybe some intrinsic posting associated with that, or even some extrinsic posting, and to try to balance the foot a little bit better, that's where you kind of start cutting your teeth with the custom.
So at what point? So I think your point about making the foot shoe interface better is spot on, because a lot of times people come in and you're like, my question is like, well, how married are you to these shoes?
Mm-hmm.
And they're, oh, I just bought them, and this is what I've always bought. All right, well, then maybe we need to work with that. But sometimes it's just a matter of, like you're saying, different manufacturers are going to have different last shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And, if a shoe has a tendency to run extremely narrow, that may not be the shoe for them. Or if the shoes are not sex specific. So I know that we want to think that all shoes, like ladies' shoes, are made just for ladies and guys' shoes are made just for guys. But the truth of the matter is, with some manufacturers, they're in the same factory and one comes out blue and one comes out pink.
Mm-hmm.
And the pink one is the girl's shoe, although maybe it could be a guy's shoe these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
As far as that goes. But things like heel box construction, toe box construction, widths, things like that, and how that fits in with what the patient's foot is shaped like. Guys generally have blocky feet, women have inverted triangles, generally speaking, and there's always exceptions to the rules. So you put a woman's foot in a shoe that has a big heel box, she's going to have a lot of slop. She's going to get play in the rear foot. It's not going to interface well. So just switching her shoe. So at what point, and I realize with your athletes and stuff, you probably have constraints because you have contracts with companies and you kind of have to use, their stuff. How much latitude do you have, and how often do you say, hey, have you thought about this, using this shoe instead of this shoe?
So not a whole lot of latitude, especially during competition where the lights are brightest, the TVs are on, and people are expecting to see, certain
the brand, yeah,
certain brands, certain logos on your shoe when they're, because that's what they're paying for, right? Now we could get away with it maybe in cases where some practices they might be able to wear a different shoe, but then you get into the situation. I literally had this conversation earlier this week, literally. How good of an idea is it to get somebody used to wearing one shoe in practice and then switching them for a game? I don't necessarily think that's a great idea either. Yeah. So, in certain cases we might, and this is a whole nother rabbit hole discussion, but, maybe in our world, we might be able to send said athlete to said shoe manufacturer, depending on how good of an athlete they are and what their NIL money, how much they're worth to the organization, let's say, can a brand like, I'm going to name several so you don't know, but say it's a Nike versus Adidas, or you send them to the New Balance, you send them to home office and say, hey guys, make a custom shoe for this particular person. They have done that in the past, but it's not a common practice, let's say. It's not a common practice. We do have some latitude potentially in the style of given brand. So in the case of a Nike, let's say, because it's easy to talk about, you can talk Pegasus, you can talk Nike Free, you can talk Zoom, Romero. You can go in different styles of shoes, let's say, which may offer a little bit of a slightly different fit, potentially, different weight, different stability, all those type of things. Some shoes just feel better on certain people than others, so there is some latitude there, but it's a little bit more constraining in my environment than just the general high school athlete, recreational weekend warrior kind of athlete that's just trying to get something that's comfortable that works.
Right. And then sometimes we run into the issue, and perhaps you do too, of, and even when you build a custom, having that fit the last of the shoe in an appropriate manner without having to grind. We find this with track shoes, with some of the stuff that has to be a lot narrower because the shank portion of the orthotic, it's all shank dependent, and it has to sit flat on the surface. And if it doesn't sit flat, then there's other issues that are going to ensue. So sometimes we're finding ourselves having to modify the orthotic, not in its functional aspect, but in its physical dimensions, so that it'll fit inside the shoe appropriately. Or the last is extremely curved, and the orthotic's not.
Well, those are great. Those are great points. And a lot of times when I have some of those tricky feet or tricky situations, the actual lab will ask me to send the shoes with the mold. So, that can happen on occasion. I have taken a shoe. I'm not going to take the athlete's shoe that they're currently wearing, but I might just take an extra one we had on the shelf and send it to them and say, this is the shoe we're using. I'm lucky that the lab I have has a lot of the lasts in their system, their filing system. So they know what the shape is exactly for that shoe at that given size, and they can kind of start to shape it most appropriately for that given last, which helps a lot. But when we start getting to some of the specialty ones like the track spikes, etc., they really love it. They love it when I'm able to send a pair of spikes with them. And this way they can really know what they're dealing with.
Yeah, we've done that with that, and as well as with rock climbing shoes.
Yeah.
And we've had to build things because they're so tight and there's so many
Mhm.
constraints in there, being able to actually change that function. We ended up having to put a first ray extension on a gal that was a competitive rock climber. And it was a very interesting looking orthotic,
Mhm.
to say the least, but it worked. And she didn't have first MTP pain when she was climbing. So that was a good thing. So what I'm hearing from you is, you're dealing with a different patient population. We obviously deal with athletes, but I'm not dealing with all of the same ones you are. And mine are at a different level. Mine are mostly skiers or mountain bikers, as far as that goes. So your tendency to jump maybe a little bit more into a custom is largely because they have very unique individual needs. They've already kind of been through the rigmarole of having everything. They're not the typical person that's walking in to see, into somebody's office off the
Mhm.
street. Yeah.
And the perception of they want what's best, quote unquote, right? And I'm not here to say that a custom orthotic is necessarily better than an over-the-counter orthotic, but the argument is there when you say like this custom is built for you, therefore it is better than something that could work that is not specifically built for you.
Right.
So it's that little bit of a battle back and forth, and verbiage back and forth, and just overall perception, right? We're trying to do everything in our power to get our athletes back, right? So the athlete gets the buy-in, et cetera. So if we're doing something specifically designed for them and their foot, the perception and in a lot of cases reality is that that is designed for their specific needs and their shapes and their strengths and weaknesses, et cetera. But if we kind of spin that a little bit, I have over the years done a lot of the over-the-counter customizable type of orthotic, where you talked about it a little bit about modifying the sock liner and such. But if you get an orthotic that's over the counter that's made of certain materials such as EVA or cork, oftentimes those are very heat moldable, and you can actually mold them to that particular person. Now, you're not taking a mold of the person in like a plaster casting or a 3D modeling type of scenario, but you are direct molding it in a lot of cases to that particular foot, therefore getting the exact arch contour that you're needing. And then when that molding process, that heating process cools, it usually or can stay in that new molded position. Oftentimes you can reinforce it with other material to kind of make it stay there a little bit better and be more supportive. And you can add external posts to those type of devices. So you can get a pretty customizable, custom type of device using an over-the-counter type of scenario without necessarily 3D molding or plaster casting to get the custom orthotic.
Right. Okay, there you have it.
Awesome. Guys.
Hey, you
Yeah,
talked about mods.
yeah.
So something that people might want to keep in mind, you and I did a seminar a little over a year ago, all on orthotic therapy, things like from walking to running, the essentials of foot orthotic therapy. You can go to our Vimeo channel and you can download that and take a look at it. It's a great program. We go through all the common postings that you're going to do, how to do it. We're actually in the lab. We've got multiple angle views. The camera crew did an absolutely incredible job as far as being able to capture all of that stuff. We talk about, materials, that kind of stuff, but we show you how to do a lot of those mods. So if you're the kind of person that likes to do a lot of that sort of thing in your office and you don't want to rely on somebody, and the nice thing is if you need to make a change because somebody didn't do it correctly, you can do that in the office. Make sure you check the program out. So
awesome. We'll put that in the description of the video. We'll the link to the Vimeo page. All right, guys. Have a great day. Thanks again for joining the Gate Geek. Scott and Ivo out.
Take care.